Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Energy Safety Canada webinar, Supervisor Competency Rollout. Our presenters today are Murray Elliott and Michael Mass, both of Energy Safety Canada, and I am your host, Andrew Davis. Now, just before we get started, a few housekeeping notes. Please do interact with us and ask us questions as the presentation progresses. You can send those questions directly to me with the chat function. Along the bottom of your screen, you'll see the chat icon. If you click on that, that will open a chat box where you can direct your question to me directly. Also, if you are joining us from a mobile device, click on the three dots on the bottom left-hand corner of your screen, and that should pop up the chat and raise hand functions. Please do give us some feedback as we progress. You can answer to simple questions with yes or no, or suggest we go faster or slow down. Again, if you would like some clarification, please do send us that note in the chat button. Now, just to test the functionality and make sure everyone can both hear the presentation and see it, if you could comment or hit the yes or no button in the participants. And if the answer is no, either myself or my co-host Adria Bratton will reach out to you. All right, now just while we wait for those results to come in, the agenda today. We have opening remarks from Murray Elliott, and then we'll move into the body of our presentation with Michael Mass. He'll be talking, of course, about the supervisor competency resources, why supervisor competency is key, some of the previous work, and then we'll move into next steps. And now it's my pleasure to introduce for some opening remarks our President and CEO, Murray Elliott. Murray, the floor is yours.
Okay, thanks, Andy. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us to learn more about our latest resources we've just released on supervisor competency. We can all argue that capable, competent supervisors are the most important to deliver safe, efficient, and effective results. This work comes out of the Safety Standards Council. The Safety Standards Council is an organization of executive leaders from across our industry, at this point 15 different companies, and it spans all sectors and all sizes of organization. And what this group does is agree on the need for new standards, provides the resources to help develop them, adopt them themselves, and then promote wider adoption within industry. This work is all facilitated by Energy Safety Canada. Standards that we've already developed prior to this are life-saving rules, common safety orientation, and potentially serious incidents. Our goal is through this standardization is to reduce duplication and complexity and to align across our industry around common best practices so that we can get better safety outcomes. So first, a huge thank you to the team that came from these various companies that collaborated in order to create the materials that Michael Mass is going to talk about. While supervisor competency is not explicitly a standard, it's certainly a focal point for us to drive and align further collaboration across the industry and get really good at ensuring we've got competent and capable supervisors. With that, I'll pass it over to Michael Mass.
Perfect. Thank you, Murray and Andy. Again, my name is Michael Moss, and I work with the Industry Development and Support Team for Energy Safety Canada. And for the past year or so, I've been working with an industry task group to develop these new resources. The first being critical competencies for supervisors, which really is what it is. It's showing critical competency areas for supervisors to focus on. Now, this provides examples of key skills, knowledge, abilities, and most of all, behaviors. The second resource is the how-to guidance document for developing and implementing a supervisor competency program. And really what this is, it's a reflection of industry practices. So this leverages existing industry resources to share updated perspectives on competency. This also highlights common challenges that companies have had to face and have had to navigate through. So we're able to pass that through to everybody else as well. Now, the resources that we want to show to you guys today, they are available on our webpage, so you're able to access them. We're going to be sending a notification out to industry shortly. So right now, it's you guys have first access to it, which is great. And what I want to go through today is some of the key features and provide insights into their development. So I'm not an expert, but I have been fortunate enough to spend quite a bit of time learning from those who have gone through this. And I know my perspective personally on Competency has changed since I've started this project. And I'd definitely like to thank our task group for their guidance and insights into developing these resources. They made my job a lot easier by providing really good insights for us. So the age-old question, why is supervisor competency? So supervisor competency has been an area of concern for some time, and not just supervisor competency, just as competency in figuring out what it means for everybody else. So the approach we took was we looked towards our industry partners and wanted to see what they were doing. So in 2019, we completed an industry scan encompassing many companies. And really what we wanted to know was how they were dealing with competency. So what were their challenges, and most of all, what were their successes with it? We found a lot of interesting things, but what we really found was that every organization was going through some sort of change. Each had their various approach and focus point. Some were consolidating their systems, so moving from 2 or 3 different learning management systems down to 1. Some were identifying key competencies and just really trying to streamline their efforts. And others were taking a phased approach for training supervisors. So instead of loading a person up at the beginning, they're trying to stagger their training throughout their work so that they can be more effective with the use and actually apply it to its proper use. It's very important to note that change takes time. So whether you're developing tools for staff, implementing new processes, or even onboarding, it takes some time to do this. So some organizations could take up to 3 years before they even start seeing the results from the changes they're implementing today. We did see a couple other common areas focused on. This included both systems and leadership training. We started to see a lot of soft skills and company values. People were talking about that, their importance, focusing on communication and company values. Many also found a way to incorporate specialized business needs, such as systems and procedures. And really that provides, it's like using your platforms or having strong practices. They really wanted people to kind of know those aspects of their business. Now, in the past, many organizations focus on what I call the foundational understanding or technical items. And these are your systems and your processes. These are the things you actually need to know to be able to perform the job correctly. And what I like to do is I like to think of the soft skills as more performance enhancers. It's really what separates good from great. So I'm sure if everyone can think of examples of people that are very, very technical, but may have trouble communicating some of their ideas. An example I like to use is listening. You don't have to be a good listener for some tasks, but you might miss the chance to address something before it becomes a larger issue. And of course, supervisors have a critical role. Supervisors are essential to make sure the worksite is safe and that standards are being upheld. So if there are deviations from the standard, the supervisors need to address it and make sure expectations are aligned both from regulatory, company, and even the community perspective. Really, supervisors on site are reducing the risk of incidents and injuries. They also have a connection to life-saving rules, specifically fit for duty. They need to be able to recognize when a worker is not fit or capable to perform a task safely. So many typically think of life fit for duty as fatigue management or alcohol and drug, but really a large part of it is actually making sure the worker's in the right headspace to do the job. Do they have their mind on task? Are they mentally capable of performing that task safely, or is there something on their mind today? And real quick, we're going to move into a poll question. There's 3 different poll questions we're going to bring up throughout the course of this presentation, and really provides us a good opportunity to kind of see where industry's at. So where is everyone kind of sitting? So in terms of your organization's competency management program, which stage would best describe the state of the program for 2021 for you guys?
All right, thank you, Mike. That poll question should be up on the screen of all our participants. We do have some results rolling in. About 60% of the field has responded. And happily, it looks like about 44% are in the continuous improvement phase. That's the majority. 22% implementing change, 19% planning, and 16% just starting. So I'll leave that up there for another couple of seconds. About 80% of the field has reported in. And we'll close that off there. And we'll share those results. Everybody should be able to see that. So continuous improvement was the leading result there at 41%. Back to you, Mike.
Perfect. Thanks, Andy. Just going to close the poll question from my view. So really, we want to talk about the previous work. So to understand where we're going, we need to understand where we've already been. And when we look at the competency resources that have been available over the last 20 years or so, we start to see a little bit of a change. We see them moving away from being more training focused and focusing a little bit more on competencies or criticality and providing specific advice. And so one of the examples from this too is IRP 7. So the Drilling and Completions Committee has their IRP 7 for well site supervisors. And really that's just, it was a lengthy list of training requirements and certifications that are needed to be a supervisor on a well site. So in 2019, the group went back and they pretty much tossed out the whole list and they started from scratch. And they said, look, employers need to determine competency a little bit on their terms and they have a part in this as well. So what they did was they made the new IRP more of a process for employers to identify where their criticality points are and where their gaps are. So it was no longer a list of required training. It was up to the employers to determine what their supervisors need to be determined competency. How are they determining competency for them? We also started to see a lot of the industry guidance become more specific. Programs were getting streamlined, moving away from being a lengthy list of things that could be done and more focused on the critical components. And we started to see that with CAP's critical competencies, and even still our supervisor leadership course in health and safety in the workplace course. That's been getting a lot of traction over the last few years here, and people are getting really good insights from it to see, what is expectations of a supervisor in a day-to-day setting. Having those conversations to make sure that they are aware of what their expectations are, what they need to do as a supervisor. So we started to see some of those changes going on, and a lot of this advice gets more specific. Even with INCHPO in 2013, they're more changing about what a safety practitioner looks like. And IOGP as well too has a very specific advice, more getting into the technical aspects of there. The other thing with competency is that there's no shortage of advice on this topic. Just doing a quick Google search, you can see for supervisor competency resources, a whole number of topics come up and take a person an endless amount of time to really go through them. Even if you don't think to our sector there's a whole lot, you can take a look and see there's still quite a bit of resources. Everyone's trying to put their own flavor a little bit on there or kind of tweak the same kind of advice. For the focus of today though, and for us, we really focused on where our industry have already taken us. So some of the perspectives that have already been developed and put out. So we originally had a guideline in 2010 called Supervisor Competency. So this was the first rendition of this from the industry perspective at that time. Again, as people wanted more of a specific part of how to do this, we also developed a Competency Management Systems Program Development Guide. And then we see CAP come out with the critical roles in competency. And then again, DAC and the IRP 7, we see a change more to focusing on critical processes and really streamlining those systems. So these are all really important resources because they kind of show the perspective that we had and where we're going to be continuing to go. So I'll start real quick with the supervisor competency from 2010. And this group did a really great job of embedding the idea that effective leadership and communication are integral to each competency a supervisor has. They really discussed the element areas of planning, performance, measurement, and improvement. And really that you can see that leadership and communication is embedded in each of those parts. And when you look at this, this is really just the plan, do, check, act with a focus on leadership and communication. So again, this is really about continuous improvement for supervisors and really kind of giving some guidance and examples of what people can look for. A lot of great resources still in these guides, characteristics and attributes of a competent supervisor, assessment questions. These are really good tools that people can kind of take a look at and can still kind of tweak to their own needs, I guess. They also had a lot of examples for leadership activities, whether it be lead by example, manage change, solve problems. And some of the feedback we have heard is that, it'd be nice to have these categories in some sort of, or it's nice to have these examples in some sort of categories or some sort of cohesive way a little bit. So this was one of the drivers for the critical competency list that we're going to be talking about shortly. And then when CAP came out with the critical roles in competency in 2017, this was strategic guidance to provide a consistent approach for industry. CAP talks about the idea of competency as a risk mitigation strategy. And the goal for the document overall was to get each organization to really assess their risk to identify critical components. So it's interesting to note too that CAP also notes that the absence of standardization really does pose a risk for companies in our industry. So they do address different industry misconceptions as well. They're addressing the notion that training alone does not equate to competency. It's part of a larger picture. So there is no definitive end to the process of competencies. You're really going to be gaining and losing competencies over time. Now, for anyone helping their older kids with schoolwork last week, I don't have to explain this to you any further. What I do find though is that people tend to think of their abilities of how they used to perform instead of where they are now. So they were good at this task a long time ago. They think they're still good, and that's where people can run into trouble. Similarly, it doesn't have to be a very long time for people to gain and lose competencies. And some of our task group members have reported, seasonality of workers. So some workers might work really hard and long, consistent approaches for 1 to 2 months, and then they have some time off. And even just a few weeks is enough to kind of start developing some of those rust on their skill sets. We also saw the introduction of the learning model. Really talks about the ideal way for someone to kind of be learning, and that 70% of what they learn should come from on-the-job experience. 20% should come from mentoring and coaching, and then about 10% should really come from classrooms, courses, and reading. So we incorporated this concept into development plan templates, which is on our website now. So when you go through, you'll see, it kind of buckets a little bit so people can kind of keep that in mind as they're kind of putting up their development plans. Switching over to in 2017, where we developed our management system. Now this guideline was really for companies to check if their management system has essential elements. It really provided just a roadmap for the steps of what you need to do to build a competency management system. So you can see all the different steps: the plan, design, operate, audit, and review. And we do get a lot of feedback that people want to know more about these steps. So for stage 2 in design, where they have develop a competency profile, people want to know actually how you do that. How do you progress that step so you can start deciding which processes and methods you want to use? It's other interesting to note that too, that this resource in 2017 was really geared more towards hiring a candidate than actually developing kind of with them. So again, with DAC IRP 7 in 2019, the previous version had focused on training and certificate requirements. And it's now a process for employers to identify minimum requirements or gaps in their programs. These IRPs used to be really long, 100 and 200 page documents. This one's a 20-page document. So if you want to read it, it's a good opportunity to do so. But they have a very simple process for organizations determining what is critical. And one is to define a serious outcome. So what are you trying to avoid, or what are you trying to protect? Then you look at your controls required for that. Is it any equipment? Is it people? Or is it processes? You determine who is responsible, and then look at the criticality of competencies that they have. And then what you need to do is assess personnel and address deficiencies using the learning model of experience, mentoring, and training. What this does is it empowers employers to manage incompetency on their terms. It allows them to prioritize appropriately as to what training they want their people to go through and where they want to spend more time on the job. They apply resources where they have the most impact. So we'll go for another poll question real quick. So which of the following resources have you found most beneficial? And even if you're not familiar, we want to know that as well too. We want to make sure that we're giving people the good information they need and access to it. Andy, I'll pass it to you.
All right, so everybody should see that poll question up in front of them. And about 50% of the field has responded, and most of the field is not familiar with these resources, 56%. So we'll give that another couple of seconds, closing in on 80% of respondents. And I think we'll close it off there. All right. 58% not familiar with these resources, 18% familiar with the Supervisor Competency Guideline of 2010, and then tied at 10% for both IRP 7 and the Energy Safety Canada Competency Framework Guideline. The CAP critical roles and competency, just 3 respondents at 4%.
Excellent. Thank you, Andy. So yeah, we do have some great summaries, and I think I'll be posting those onto our website so that people can have access to them and get a sense of what those resources are about. So really good information for us to know, and appreciate everyone's input there. So now we'll move on to talking about the actual new resources that we're here to talk about today. And so the intent of these resources is really to save development time and show how to progress programs. Now, these resources, they're kind of partnering with each other a little bit. So we have a supervisor competency guideline, but in there, you're not going to find a lot of specifics about what a supervisor needs to have. That's where more of the critical competency list comes from. So these 2 resources were meant to kind of use interchangeably a little bit. So our task group 2, they were tasked with a few things. And now one was for them to align on competencies, health and safety and soft skills deemed critical for supervisors. We wanted them to leverage the existing industry resources and to develop how-to guidance. We didn't want to scrap anything or start from brand new again. We wanted to make sure we took what we had that was good and focused on where we can expand on. And this is really where learning about industry challenges from the task group members really became important and critical for developing these resources. Now, with the task group, we did kind of have to set the boundaries, because when you're talking about competency, it's such a large topic that part of the challenge is that everyone has their own different views based on their experience of what competency is. So we really needed to make sure that everyone's talking the same language. So the first things that we kind of do was talk about supervisors. Many organizations actually have various levels of supervisors. So it's not as simple as just saying this applies to all supervisors. So we wanted to make sure that when we were talking about all supervisors who this does belong to, that everyone was speaking the same language there. So they weren't just thinking frontline supervisors, they were thinking the ones in the office as well too. And so really we came up with a definition as, defining the supervisors for the terms of our task group as those who direct the performance of work. The other things we really wanted to make sure was we wanted to make sure that the competencies were transferable skills. It's not just something that was specific to one industry sector or one specific company, that you could take these competencies and apply them across the board to any position who's a supervisor. And we also wanted to avoid technical skills such as specialized safety knowledge. While this is really key to have, not every supervisor may need to have that information or that level of detail. So this kind of really helped us set the boundaries for what we want to make these resources and how we wanted to approach industry with it. And overall, we did not want to make the deliverables prescriptive. We wanted to allow people flexibility. Competency takes time to understand, and you got to be able to play with some, find what works for your organization. So it's us telling you exactly how to do something. It doesn't really work that way. The other piece that we really focused on was what's critical. And so again, people have different perspectives and different views based on their own experiences. Some may think it's managing job quality. Some may think it's record keeping, and others may think it's understanding work culture. It's very easy with these conversations to get into the weeds of what's critical. And everyone's got such different perspectives and even focuses, really, that this becomes a challenge. So the way we stepped around that was we wanted to be able to see where we wanted these resources to go. And so we wanted people to be able to assess readiness or guide existing users, supervisors to developing their skills. So that's where we ended up. And that's actually ended up helping us guide our conversations a little bit better. And so we didn't get stuck in too many weeds. Now, where did these kind of competency categories come from? Well, what we did was we went back and took a look at the topics and the leadership courses that people had said that they were putting their people through. So we went and looked at, there's quite a few leadership courses out there, if you haven't known. But when you look at the different topics of what they're talking about, you start to see some things emerge. You can start organizing these things around. Sometimes they have the same name, but just a little bit different context. But really, you could start seeing some buckets forming. And as we kind of took a step back after we listed a whole bunch of them, we started to see about 5 different areas grow. So we saw identify and mitigate hazards. We saw executing work. We saw legislation or regulatory obligations. We saw planning and prioritizing, and we saw engagement with the workforce. Where the task group ended up was landing on 4, as the group felt that legislation was really just a part of work. That's really just a standard you're upholding or exceeding to what you're doing. So where we landed was this. We landed that a competent supervisor is one who plans and prioritizes, engages the workforce, identifies and mitigates hazard, and executes work. The competencies were set up so that each competency category has a clear outcome. So for each competency category, we really wanted to make sure that we were driving towards an outcome, that there was something that was clear and concise that everyone can understand, no matter where you're coming from. The next important was to have the subgrouping. As you're starting to list some competencies or examples of skills and behaviors, you start seeing some grouping pop out, and that's what we'll see in these resources. So all these kind of cascade back up and support the larger outcome. So these subgroups really go back to support that competency category and that outcome. And then we have examples of knowledge, skills, abilities, and behaviors that really kind of help drive that competency and achieve those outcomes. And that's where our focus was for this. So what we'll do is we'll go through a few examples of these. Now there are more, it's not just these ones and that's the whole list. I just pulled some kind of strategic ones out, but we really encourage people to go and check the resources on the webpage. So we'll start with the critical competencies examples for plans and prioritizes. So really the outcome is that the resource required to achieve the desired standard or standards can be used under the conditions at the required time. So again, this is very important that the right tools or people needed to complete the work are able to. It doesn't make sense to have a monitor that doesn't work in cold weather when you're outside all the time in winter. Now the subcategory, one of the subcategories for this is develops work plans and applies lessons learned. So this is whether they're planning ahead monthly, quarterly, yearly to anticipate those timelines and barriers, or whether they're collaborating with others who are completing critical tasks in their operations. There we go. Oh, I think I skipped one. There we go. So the next one is engages the workforce. So communication and collaboration that supports completing work to the desired standard. So really what this is about is that did they talk to the right people at the right time and do they have the right information? Communication flow is very important and supervisors have a very critical role with that. The subcategory, one of them subcategories we chose for highlighting this is develops a team environment and supports those performing work under their direction. So for example, can they demonstrate, an example would be demonstrates comprehension of work standards by highlighting critical components to effectively mentor employees before, during, and after the task. And this kind of hits on everything that supervisors should understand the standards and the critical points of them, where they can actually give guidance to people before and after so that they can get that feedback and grow as a team and really kind of grow their collective competency. A competent supervisor is one who identifies and mitigates hazards. Now this took a fair amount of rendition and wordsmithing and torturing some different sentences. But ultimately what we came up with was we got this to be as clear as it possibly can. And it just takes times when you're doing this because you really start saying, well, what are we trying to say? What are we actually trying to move towards and what do we want to say? So the outcome for this one was the risk is reduced to a level acceptable to the organization. One of the examples of a subcategory would be conducts workplace assessments. And so they provide coaching opportunities when there are deviations from the work standard, or they appraise evidence of workers' qualifications and experience suitability prior to executing work. So this means if someone comes on site and the supervisor is talking to them, showing them around the site and talking about their expectations, do they get a sense the person is competent to do the job? Do they have enough experience? Do they have the right training? Just asking those somewhat basic questions to this worker, do they get a sense that they're going to do a good job or that they have more questions? So those are very important things to kind of look at a little bit. And again, too, like all these competencies, it's really to assess a supervisor's readiness. And also existing supervisors can take some of these items and look at developing some more of their skill sets, whether it be soft skills or not. Oh, sorry. And one more is execute work, the most important one. This is where tasks are completed to the desired standard under a variety of conditions. And really, this is about upholding the standard despite the conditions or circumstances. And this one kind of ties into all of them a little bit, because to be able to work in all different conditions, you have to have planned properly, you have to engage the workforce, and you have to identify the hazards so you can know when to mitigate a plan, when to change. So this one kind of ties into all of them a little bit. One of the subcategories is the reinforces roles and responsibility. So the examples are that it sets reporting expectations to those being directed, or another one is provides information about the desired work standards to those, sorry, I got something pop up, to those being directed there. All right. So we're going to switch gears and talk about the guidance document now. And so again, this guidance document is building on key points from some of the other resources we have. We wanted to go in and where people had stuck points, we wanted to provide more clarity or more approaches for them to move past some of those common areas. And so one of the best things I do like about this guideline document is that the advice in it, it's talking about supervisors, but it can really be applied to any target audience. So again, at the very beginning, there's no shortage of advice or definitions. And what I typically find is that the differences in definitions really speak to the values of the organizations who are putting them out. So a couple examples here is one is the application integration of qualification, knowledge, skills, abilities, behaviors to achieve an outcome under conditions to a specific standard of performance. I really like that one. A lot of other companies were kind of adopting that approach. And other ones that were good were ability to perform based on a combination of knowledge, practical and thinking skills and experience. Now in our guideline document, we have quite a few resources. We wanted to show that how the definitions have been changing over time as people's perspectives are showing. But all at their basic level, what these do have is they have a standard of performance and they have combinations of thinking and doing that can be measured or observed. And that's really what we want people to focus on. If you're picking a definition that suits your company, we want to make sure you have those basic elements in there. We also discussed the concept of proficiency. So how effectively and efficiently, you complete a task. Training only really gets you so far, and to get better, it takes that deliberate professional practice. You have to keep trying things and keep moving forward. An example I like to use is using the mute button on a conference call. If you're not practicing, you're not getting better, and everyone knows who you are. So everyone can be, if you're not using those skill sets appropriately, you do lose them over time. So you keep having to put that deliberate professional practice in to getting the results you want to see. We also talk about an idea from Bloom's taxonomy. And really this is used by educators to define learning objectives. So it has, when you're trying to define objectives for competency, it's a very good tool for that. And we can share, it starts to talk about higher and lower order thinking skills, whether it be from knowledge to the ability to generate new helpful ideas. And the idea is that you really have to progress. To progress, you need to be able to have the previous skill. So before you can evaluate something, you really have to understand how to use that. Before you analyze something, you have to understand it. And before you can apply it, you have to understand it. So this is really a good way for when you're thinking about competencies or you're developing it, where you want your supervisors to be. And of course, you don't want them just to have knowledge or basic understanding. That's great to have, but ideal for supervisors to have them a higher order thinking skills of being able to analyze, evaluate, and create. And there is different renditions and versions of Bloom's taxonomy. So we use this one, but other people are welcome to go see the other renditions. All very helpful either way. So the other thing is about establishing proficiency levels. There's different ways to do this. Some companies choose to do more. So we just chose to do 3 basic ones as we felt they kind of covered most. I've seen some organizations that have up to 4 to 5 different granular little areas where they can show the levels of proficiency on something. So for us, we kind of stuck with aware being just a basic understanding of concepts, and you require that guidance. You really require more feedback to learn as if you're in that bucket. If you're skilled, you're detailed knowledge and understanding, and you can assist others in the application of this. And really you recognize there are additional issues to be considered and you consult others. And then if you're mastery, you have specialist level knowledge and can explain concerns in relation to kind of broader issues. So with mastery, you kind of tend to see people optimizing solutions and knows which additional factors to consider and which ones don't to consider. When you're establishing the different proficiency levels for your supervisors or for anybody in competency roles, proficiency must be considered in the context of how they apply to the job. So for example, a supervisor may need to understand how to support the incident investigation process, but that does not mean they necessarily need to be an expert in the subject. Another example is you don't need to be a lawyer to understand what needs to be in a contract agreement. So it's really up to the employers to make sure that they're setting the bars appropriately for the right level of proficiency required for their supervisors. So one of the stumbling blocks where we do see a lot, and we hear from organizations, is we see a lot of people may have got off track because they didn't really set a clear vision for themselves. So setting that vision is very important to keep things on track so that everyone knows the vision you're taking, your strategy, your objectives, and even your tactics. The other thing is when you're developing competencies for an organization, you typically have a development team, and this can take time to do. So maybe working on this for a couple of years, maybe longer, but you're going to see people kind of come off that team. So by having a strong vision and something that you can have, it really kind of keeps everyone on track. So you're not getting sidetracked and moving in a different direction. It helps guide decisions so you can know which direction you're going, you know what to say is yes and what is no. So strong visions really help answer those questions of, where are you going now and where are you going to be in the future? How will you know when it's done? How does this tie into existing programs at your organization? How will you show your work? Like what needs to be recorded? What needs to be documented? Who's responsible? And then also in our templates, we actually provide on a webpage, we provide a template for this so people can put a summary in there. Just so they can, a quick handout, you don't have to have a huge lengthy document for this. It's just something that you can apply so that someone can take a look at and go, okay, I understand where we're going and I can help you support that. We also talk about frameworks where we see this as another challenge where people kind of get caught up onto what they want to do. And we provide a couple of different examples. One is a basic setup and one's more in advance. And with the basic setup, it's really simple. All we have is the basic level of competency, an outcome, kind of what we said in the critical competency list, and then people can just list the competencies that you're trying to track and what they want to see. More advanced can be set up a little bit differently to start showcasing the differences in proficiency. So same idea with setting up your competency category and your outcome you're trying to achieve or what you're trying to protect. And then you can see just kind of the different levels of awareness, what they would need, what skilled would need, and what mastery would need. And this really allows workers to understand what the distinctions are between each level and where they are. So for a person who really wants to make it a career side, they can see where they need to be to evaluate at a mastery level and start their own little development plan for that. Processes are another one that does catch people a fair amount. So we do talk again about IRP7. We provide some insights into kind of how to use that process a little bit. So looking at the critical and identifying gaps in their own system. We also talk about structured collaboration to get information from the right people in the right roles. So what we use when we're designing training courses and stuff is there's something that we do called developing a curriculum or a DACUM. And really what you're doing is you're bringing a bunch of industry people who really understand that role, and they're describing what ideal performance looks like. Typically at the end, you have a profile chart that details duties and responsibilities. And this also helps employers assess candidate readiness for it. Because the important thing of this is having the right people, because people often think they know what a person does, but only the ones who are actually in that role knows what goes on a day-to-day basis. So you want to make sure when you're having a structured collaboration, where you're having those people in. And we had a few task group members saying that, you know, when they first started it, they didn't incorporate everyone. And then as they started bringing people in, they started to see, you know, their insights that they had really help drive and develop their system a lot better. So if they would have done that earlier, it would have saved them a lot of time. Drafting competency is another sticking point. So typically you can always there's no shortage of this on the internet. You can always take a look at different competencies and take what you like or try to come up with your own. But when you're trying to develop competencies, we always want you to remember a few things, is that you should define competencies that deliver results. So there should be some sort of data to support it. If not, you probably don't need it. You want to focus on what can be developed and what can be measured. And you also want to emphasize will do more than can do. So for myself particularly, I found this tool very, very helpful to save a lot of time. And really what it does is provide the right wording to help describe your competency. So if you're trying to develop a competency where you want a supervisor to evaluate something, you can go into the keywords here and kind of pick out what you want to see. So we got this from the My Growth Mindset, which is an educator tool. But when we were working on this saved so much time. And this is a really good resource for people to use. So I encourage people to give it a try and see what they like. But it's also able to show those lower level thinking skills and the higher level thinking skills and where they kind of sit up. So even if you look at your own job descriptions or supervisors, you know, look at some of the descriptive statements or competencies you actually have for them now and what you want them to be. Are they at the lower level where they're just understanding, they're comprehending, or are they at the higher part where they're evaluating and creating? We also talk about development plans. And again, our templates on the guideline on our website does have development plans where it's broken down to 70-20-10 models. But another aspect that I really like too is that we use kind of KPIs to identify some ideal behaviors. So if you know the KPIs you're doing, you can just kind of ask some basic questions to understand, well, what might affect this? And after you go down a few levels of asking that question, you kind of start to see a theme pull out of different drivers for behaviors or different cues where things might be weak a little bit. So we talk a little bit more about that, and that's definitely something worth taking a look at. We also talk about verification, and what verification is really showing your work. So your competency program, and when you do assessments, it really should be, how do you do this? Show me how. Show what you're doing. So we show multiple methods of verification and how they can be used. And our overview of completing verifications as to what to expect. We also have kind of what makes a good assessor. So some really basic key points that people need to be able to consider, because there's a specialty. It's almost an art form of being an assessor a little bit, to know when to probe deeper into the questions and when not. And that's definitely something you learn more on experience-based than something you take from a training course. We also have considerations for data in here as well too. So whether it be qualitative or quantitative. Quantitative becomes very easy because it's your yes, no, or your numbers. How many have you done this? But really where you get more insights from is that qualitative level information. So not the fact that you did 12 inspections, but what was the level of value that you got from one of those inspections? Did you find some good insights from there? So both of these kind of work together a little bit to provide a bigger picture of what's going on. So people need to consider how they're using the data. The other way too, it can sometimes work against you a little bit. If you're focusing entirely on too much qualitative data and information, it's hard to compare things. So if two of us were to go and do an assessment, I have a bunch of insights, you have a bunch of insights from qualitative assessments. How do we compare those to make sure that they're actually speaking the same language? So this is where we provide some insights and some considerations for people to think about when they're working on these. And then for continuous improvement. So when assessing the risk associated with change, you really want to consider having the right people involved. You want to review the risk of misalignment with your corporate strategy to make sure you're not going in a different direction. And you want to understand the assumptions and limitations of a change. If you're moving to platforms, are you able to move platforms later, or is there going to be causing a dependency issue? And you really want to weigh the impact of disruptive changes. Is this change that you're going to be making that's going to disrupt everyone's understanding and processes in the organization, is that worth it? Like I said, some of these organizations may not know until 3 to 4 years out what the changes are going to look at. So you really want to take a good look and evaluate before you just jump into it. And again, too, it's really helpful to anticipate future skills required for the organization. So things like virtual meetings and stuff, things that we didn't really consider would be too much of a focal point now are. And so for next steps, really where we're going with this as well, too, we want to continue to add to our templates. So we have our vision statement, we have our development planning, we have competency verification template. We have those, and you're going to see, we're going to be providing more guidance on those, a little bit more instructions, kind of rounding those out a little bit better. We're going to be developing one on KPI development as well, too, just to give people some understanding of how to kind of make it through those steps and ask the right questions they need to get to. But what we do welcome, though, is we want to get more examples from industry. So if you guys have a really good template that you want to use or we want to share with industry, please let us know. Send it to safety@energysafetycanada.com. And we'll definitely work with you in it and make sure we get it out for everyone to use. The more we learn from each other within industry, the more we all grow in this topic. And I do have another quick poll question real quick. So we want to know kind of what is your ideal format for additional competency resources? Andy, I'll pass it back to you there.
So we should have that up for our participants here. There we go. They're starting to roll in now. Pretty even to start with here. Quick tools and summaries are taking a lead with about 50% of the field reporting in. And just a reminder, we are drawing down on our time. If anybody does have any questions for Michael, you can send them to myself in the chat, and I'll pass those along. That way, if we have similar questions or things that are related, I can kind of tee those up just to be efficient. We'll leave that for another couple of seconds, about 86% reporting in here. It looks like quick tools and summaries, Mike, are the preferred choice at 56%. So we'll close that off. And yeah, quick tools and summaries at 56%, followed by guidelines at 28, webinars at 26, training courses at 28 as well. So
perfect. And we really appreciate everyone's feedback on that too. That helps us guide our future direction of where we want to put our efforts. So we're seeing that quick tools and summaries where people at, just clearly people, a lot going on right now. So that's definitely where we can put some focus on getting some additional guidance out in this topic here. Okay, and then just so you guys have access to it, when you do access our webpage, this is what the new resource page is going to look like. You find it in our standards and program side of it. But here you can see that we do have the critical competencies. You just click on that link there, it'll pop that up. A how-to guidance document is there. We have the templates that we have right now and where we're going, and then quick links to some of those other documents as well, which are really good resources for people.
And I've posted that in the group chat for everyone.
Excellent. Thanks, Andy. All right. Any questions before 1 o'clock comes around here, I guess?
Well, Mike, I think you must have done an excellent job. You've answered everyone's questions proactively.
Perfect.
Oh, one second. Starting to roll in a couple of here. From Rod, Daychem training, any plans? Not sure what he's getting at there. Rod did sit on this group. Does that twig anything for you there, Mike?
Can you say it one more time, Andy?
He just asked about Daychems.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so with DACMs, that's an area that I'd like definitely, we find a lot of really good information from industry from using our DACM process. So equivalently, we just changed a lot of our old OSA courses to Energy Safety Canada courses. And one was the Mobile Elevated Work Platform. And so they use a DACM on that. So we got some really good insights. The courses, I think, online now, and they're able to deliver it, or it's courses available sort of thing. To take through, not online, sorry, to take through the ATPs, our authorized training providers. But we're going to be taking that and really highlighting some different resources around some of the DACMs and showing that. So with the mobile elevated work platforms, we're taking that information and we're going to give it to people and the employers who take that course so we can show them, here's what ideal performance looks like for that industry using that topic. And we want to start growing our competency library. So thanks, Rod. I appreciate that. I really do see DACMs as kind of a good way for us to go in the future here. And we just have to pick the right topics and get the right people in the room for sure.
Okay. All right. And then another question here from Kimberly, who's asking, are in-house supervisor training programs acceptable for core audit submission?
I'd have to probably ask our core audit people that.
Yeah, I think it's going to depend on what that training is. In-house training, I think, is acceptable in some cases, but for example, for well control would probably not be. However, if it was, supervisor leadership skills, that you could probably apply to core. So
I think it's worthwhile to look at the standard of what you're seeing and what their requirements are, right? So if it's not specified what type of training is needed, then I'm pretty sure in-house would probably be good, but you really want to make sure that you have that right combination of it. And similarly, like we have some offerings and other courses like Lakeland College, they have offerings as well too for supervisor competencies. People are encouraged to use both, go in there and take a look at the different resources and see what works best for your organization. We find a lot of people that use Lakeland still use ours to augment some of the things that we identified that they didn't. So yeah, thank you for that question about in-house training there.
Okay. And then a couple of pieces actually here for me. Someone is asking if we can reshare the format for training resources. So I will put that back on everyone's screen. While I answer this next question, will there be a PDF of this webinar available? Mike, I do believe we can share that.
Yeah, what I'll do is on the PDF, I'll put the links in so everyone has access to all the information they need there. So yeah, we'll get that out to everyone if we're able to do it.
We'll post that along with this webinar recording. The webinar recording will be available by the end of the week under our webinars on demand. So that will be there as well. Question from Michelle. I'm wondering if there's information out there for general competencies rather than directed to supervisor competencies, e.g. guidance for measuring competencies of workers, or should we develop this from the supervisor competency guideline?
Well, really the guideline, the way it was written, it was that we talk about supervisors, but the approaches, the processes, it's all universal. You can apply that to any target group and get some good insights from. So I think that's a good starting point. The other piece though is that you really want to make sure you have the right partners in the room, the right players. So if you're working for a particular sector, where you're getting your information from, maybe they already have some of that available. But yeah, there's going to be a growth and development here. And I think that the guideline's a good starting point because the way we developed was that you could really apply that to any target group.
Mm-hmm. All right. And there's been some general chat there in the chat box for anyone who did miss it on the applicability of core. And actually, Tasha has pointed out there is a question in the audit that outlines the basic requirements for general training. So, And also here from Tasha, there's a documented 80% supervisor training specific program that includes all of the following. Is there a documented supervisor training program that includes job responsibilities, regulations and legislative requirements, policies and procedures, supervisory skills, and emergency procedures? That is the question from the audit tool. I believe, and Mike, you can correct me if I'm wrong, our supervisor leadership for health and safety should address the vast majority of those.
We did look at when we developed these competencies, was it aligned with the course we were offering and do we need to tweak anything? And most of the competencies definitely were addressed there. If you're looking for something very specific though, you may want to take a peek at it first, or we can put you in touch. If you message safety@energysafetycanada.com, we can put you in touch with the right resource there.
All right, sounds good. All right, our time is drawing to a close. If anybody does have any follow-up questions, again, do please reach out, safety@Energy Safety Canada, or give us a call and ask to speak to myself or to Mike Mass. We do have some upcoming webinars that we hope you will join us for. We have one coming up January 27th, the Potentially Serious Incident Insights. So this is data that Energy Safety Canada got from the Alberta government, from the PSI program they implemented, and we've curated it, gone through it, and have developed some insights based upon that data for our sector. We will be reviewing that on January 27th. And then February 4th, the DROPS Canadian chapter launch. So DROPS Online was a UK, or is a UK organization, and we are starting a Canadian chapter for the prevention and awareness of dropped objects. So please do join us for that. And then February 12th, we have the Canadian Energy Museum doing a presentation on the history and evolution of safety here specifically in Western Canada. So kind of an interesting one. Join us for that. And then finally, shortly here after the presentation, you should receive a survey. Please let us know what you thought of today's presentation. What can we improve on? What did we do well? And are there any other topics that you would like us to present on? So please fill that out. It's only three or four questions. And again, that should come to you shortly. If you would like to fill that out here immediately, well, it's on the top of mind. I will post that link in the chat as well. So with that, we will close out and let you all get back to your afternoons. Thank you, Mike, for the presentation today, and we'll see you again soon for the next webinar.
Thank you, everyone.